My number one is not an Atmos mix, and it's the whole reason why I titled this video Multi-Channel Mix and not Atmos Mixes, because there is one non-Atmos mix. And if you know me, you probably saw this coming, and that is... Hello, my name is Ian, and welcome to my YouTube channel. So first off, Happy New Year and a very happy 2025 to you all. So 2024 was the year of the Atmos system for me. I don't know if I ever explained this before on the channel, but up until December of 2023, I was using a 10-year-old 5.1 system to listen to music on. And I was never very happy with it, honestly. It always sounded very thin, not particularly punchy, but there were still a number of discs that I really enjoyed. Such as the Tangerine Dream discs and many of Steven Wilson's Jethro Tull remixes. But having acquired a Dolby Atmos system in late 2023 changed my world. It changed my life. And suddenly I wanted to listen to music again. And I was even going back and hearing stuff in stereo and recollecting CDs. I had sold most of my discs at that point, and I spent 2024 reacquiring a lot. Probably too much, if I'm honest, but, hey, it's music. This was also the first year that I took YouTube really seriously, and did weekly videos. I started off doing several a week, actually, but gradually kind of winded down to one a week, which I think works better algorithmically and for you all to catch up with what I have to say. But I was just looking over my reviews and I thought, wow, 2024 was an incredible year for high resolution audiophile albums, Dolby Atmos, and reissues in general. And you're going to find on this list that there's really only one new release. And by which I mean the album itself was a new release. And the reason for that is simply that it seems like a lot of newer stuff isn't coming out on disc. And I prefer the sound of Dolby Atmos on disc exponentially compared to streaming. Streaming just sounds way too compressed to me, even though they advertise on Apple Music as being uncompressed. I can definitely tell that something is amiss. So that is why this list tends to skew older. Admittedly, my tastes do as well. But if you wanted to add an honorable mention to this list, I thought Billie Eilish's album sounded rather nice, even on streaming. And I wish that had been released physically, because I think that was a great example of the technology. But moving on to kind of more what I usually talk about here, I thought I would kind of rank these recordings, because the idea initially started out as I was just going to talk about them in a general way, and then I thought, well, that's not really a very compelling subject for YouTube. Ranking videos tend to get the clicks more because people want to add their own comments, and that's something I welcome you to do if you're watching, is to let me know how you feel. So what I found in making this list is that it was actually very difficult to rank them. And I just started ranking things higher because I preferred the material. I would say across the board, all of these releases are varying degrees of excellence, and there's not a single poor mix on the list. The only objectively poor mix that I could think of is one that I didn't really even bother to hear, and that's just because I had read about it, and that's Aphrodite's Child 666. I had read that they didn't have access to the multi-track tapes for that, and it was essentially an upmix, and there was very little in terms of surround activity. I didn't hear it for myself. That's why it's not included on this list. If you did have a chance to hear that Atmos mix, let me know in the comments if I was wrong. Should I have picked that up? Because I actually really love that album. And the reminder of its existence led for me to seek out an older late 80s CD copy. So I have been listening to 666 again lately. But with that in mind, I'm going to start the list. So at number 13, I have the Jethro Tull Christmas album. This was remixed for Dolby Atmos and stereo by Pineapple Thief's Bruce Sword. And I did review this mix. My first impression, I remember when I put it on, was that it was maybe a little bit bass heavy, a little bit too reverby for my tastes. And the instruments kind of sounded like they had a blanket over them. It's not a mix that when you put it on, it really grabs you. And that's kind of what I want out of this. I really want to feel smacked in the face as much as possible when I put on a new mix of something. And this one just didn't have it. And I speculated on my review of this album that it had to do with the way it was recorded. We do know that, of course, it was a digital recording from the early 2000s, and I don't know how much that would affect things because I'm used to hearing analog recordings that have been digitized. And I do think there's just something to the analog sound of those older albums that gives it a power and immediacy. But there are a few other digital recordings on this list that don't have that problem, so I don't really know if that explains it or not. It could also be, again, the performances themselves. There's evidence that suggests that a lot of the parts were recorded in isolation for the Christmas album, which in 2003, I don't know how much of that was going on back then. It certainly became much more common during the pandemic years for obvious reasons, but I don't know if that adds something to the lack of immediacy that that I'm hearing in these recordings, or not hearing in these recordings, as it were. That's not to say it's a bad mix. Bruce Sword did wonderfully with what he had, and he actually made me appreciate the album more than I used to. It used to be one of my dead last, least favorite Tull recordings, and now I kind of think it's okay. And something that definitely has its place to be enjoyed around the holidays. But as it stands, something had to be last. And there was a lot of stiff competition this year. So I really, I don't feel too bad about making this my least favorite multi-channel mix of the year. So at number 12, I have Animals by Pink Floyd. So some of you may scream at me immediately and say that this one should be disqualified because it is in fact a 2018 remix, and was first released back in 2022 as a 5.1 mix, which I do have. I received it as a Christmas gift. And even then there was something about it that there was like an intangible thing. I couldn't quite, there was something wrong with it. I couldn't quite put my finger on. And I've spent a lot of time listening to this Atmos mix, which came out only 2 years later, or even less than 2 years later, which I think automatically kind of turned people off of it, which is understandably so. It's like, I just bought this thing and now you're upgrading it. But I do think the Atmos mix is an improvement over the 5.1. And one of those things is that I just feel like the levels are a little better dialed in. It feels a little bit more glued together maybe than the 5.1. And I also feel that the added height speakers does increase the spaciousness of it. And it's a wonderful mix, and it does put you into the environment of the album very nicely. There's just one nagging thing that drives me crazy about it, and that's the drums. And it's the drums on the whole album. Now, I've not read any evidence of this, so this is purely guesswork on my part, but it almost sounds like the drums were programmed to me, and they seem to kind of lack dynamics, and they have a very boomy, not very clear sound to them, which is disappointing because The guitars, the vocals, even the keyboards, I think are an improvement over the original 1977 mix of Animals. But there's something about those drums, like just listen to Dogs when Nick Mason is doing those rapid fire drum rolls, almost like something out of Children of the Grave, the Black Sabbath song. And until I backed down my bass EQ on actually all of the speakers, I backed it off on everything except for the subwoofer. I couldn't really hear those individual tom strokes. It just sounded kind of messy to me, like a muddy mess. But I will say that this album sounds terrific when you do dial back the bass EQ. And I had to do it on all speakers to really get it to sound right. And, as it stands, I don't mind doing that. But I think that a great mix should sound great out of the box. You should just be able to put it in your player and it sounds perfect without you having to mess with it at all. I wish that James Guthrie had dialed back the bass EQ on the drums, and that would have helped immensely. So at number 11, I have Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, the David Bowie classic. This has been wonderfully, lovingly remixed in Atmos and 5.1 by original producer Ken Scott. And it's a very theatrical presentation. It places you very much within the drama of the record, which I think suits David Bowie's work very nicely. And it also reveals a lot of detail that was obscured for some 50 years on the original mix. And as it stands, I think it's great. Like, I really, really like this mix a lot. In fact, from here forward, I would even say, I would include Animals in that. From Animals forward, we are talking about outstanding work, in my opinion. The one thing, again, that makes me feel a little bit bad about this album, about liking it as much as I do, is that Ken Scott did say that he replaced the drums with programming. And I'm sure that if he did this, he felt like it was necessary. And I do think it's a successful replacement. That's the thing. Intellectually, it bothers me. But before I knew that, like when I did my review of this, before I knew that the drums had been replaced, it passed right by me. It just went right over my head. And I didn't notice anything was wrong. So I think it's a wonderful job, even though, the purist in me is bothered by the fact that what you were hearing is a facsimile of the original drum parts, or at least a reinforcement of the original drum parts. I think he did so in a way that it doesn't jump out at me as artificial. And there's something more artificial sounding about the drums on Animals to me, which I found no evidence that they've been replaced at all. I mean, this might be just the processing that makes them sound this way. But let's just entertain the possibility that the drums have been replaced on both Animals and Ziggy Stardust. It's more successful on Ziggy Stardust. And you really could have fooled me. You did fool me. So, this is a wonderful addition to your collection. It's really a shame that I ranked it as low as I did, because it's a wonderful work, and I want to encourage those who are in charge of the Bowie estate and these recordings to do more. Give me low in surround and Atmos. Like that's all I really want in life is David Bowie's low in Dolby Atmos. So moving on to, we are now at number 10. At number 10, I have The Missing Piece by Gentle Giant. And this was a hard one to rank because you might argue that of all of the recordings that I'm talking about here, this is the one that needed this loving remix the most, because the original album is quite flawed. It always has been. It was never really particularly well received by Gentle Giant fans, and it failed to introduce them to a wider audience, which was the intention of the record. So in a lot of ways, this is not a particularly good album. And it always sounded really strange, particularly deficient in the bass department. And Steven Wilson's work here is awesome. He's done a great job of making this album much more palatable, much more enjoyable. He can't make the writing any better, which is one of the reasons why it's ranked so low. And as we get higher on this list, the level of excellence is maintained at such a consistent level that I had to let personal taste tip the scale one way or another. It was just so hard to be objective when it's like they're this close. But in the case of Missing Piece, the one thing that made me rank it lower is that I know the original mix lacked bass, and that was something that people complained about for a long time. And the song 2 Weeks in Spain is just a little too thumpy for me. I think Steven may have overcompensated just a tiny bit, just a hair, on that one single song. The rest of it sounds much better to me. And it is a good mix. Is it as exciting as some of these other mixes? Not even close. If we were ranking it purely as an exciting mix and like leaving out all of this drum consideration and all that, I might actually rank it lower than Animals, because Animals is way more exciting as an immersive experience, and it does convert your environment to a three-dimensional Pink Floyd album, which is what I think Atmos should do. And I'm not saying that Missing Piece doesn't do that. It's just that there isn't much opportunity for these kind of fun things with this album. The material really doesn't give Wilson much to play with. And, I think that the Gentle Giant remixes are revelatory. And a lot of the earlier ones, especially like Interview, actually improved my opinion of the album and made it one of my favorites. So I just don't think that this is even one of the better Gentle Giant remixes that he's done. So I feel pretty comfortable with its position just because the original mix was so poor and this is so much better. So at number 9, this is one that I didn't review or talk about previously. And it is a work that is near and dear to me. And that is Stop Making Sense by the Talking Heads. Now, the thing to know about this is that there are a couple of Dolby Atmos mixes of this. I think that there's mainly 2, but there's also some other 5.1s rolling around somewhere. But the main one that I wanted to talk about is the movie. And that's simply because I only bought the movie. I didn't want to buy the movie and the movie soundtrack to compare them. I just wanted the film. It was expensive enough on its own. I bought it directly from A24 Films, and you may know that I am a huge film fan, even though I don't talk about movies that much on the channel anymore. That's simply down to the fact that I just feel more comfortable talking about music. But I love movies. And I was a A24 member for a brief time this past summer, and I was able to get it at a slight discount that was still quite expensive. I received it in the mail and I popped it in, and as soon as I started watching it, I completely forgot about, how much it cost. I started really enjoying it. And this film, Stop Making Sense, it's an antidepressant for me. Whenever I'm feeling down, I put this on and it makes me feel better about life in general. And what a strong appraisal of art. Like, I don't think I could give higher praise to any piece of art. And, that is part of the reason why I'm ranking it as high as I am. It maybe isn't the most thrilling Atmos mix. It definitely feels like the band is occupying the front speakers, and what you're hearing in the back is a lot of audience mics. But there are opportunities for creativity, such as the keyboard solo in Life During Wartime. You can kind of hear it rotating around the room as David Byrne is running on the stage, which is a really cool and creative choice. There's also some interesting things that I don't think are reflected in the audio only mix, and that's that they actually do raise people up in the mix who are being featured on camera. So it works as a movie soundtrack more than it does as an immersive album. And it does sound really good as the thing. Like, I might argue that the 5.1 mix from a few years ago was more musically immersive, but you can just hear so much with so much clarity that it's a good mix is the thing. Like it's not necessarily like a Steven Wilson style mix that puts you within the headspace of the recording. But it does feel like the band are live and in front of you. And I think that's what it needs to be. So this is a rather good mix. It's different than maybe some of the ones that I've put before it, or I've ranked below it. But on its own, judged by its own merits, I think it's very strong. And it does do a good job of putting you in the hall with this great band. And I love the Talking Heads. I don't talk about them nearly as much as I should, but I absolutely adore this band. So at number 8, I have Bridge of Sighs, the stoner blues rock classic from Robin Trower. This is a 5.1 and Atmos mix by Richard Whittaker. Richard Whittaker did the 5.1 and Atmos mix for Bridge of Sighs. And of all the mixes that I've included on my best of list, this is by far the most conservative, by which I mean that it is extremely front heavy. And most of the back speakers are left for overdubs and sound effects and backing vocals and guitar stuff. That being said, in this case, I agree with that choice because Bridge of Sighs is a trio recording. It's guitar, bass, and drums in your face and the vocals too. So I feel like by making it a front heavy mix that is very clear and dynamic, it's an improvement over just about any other stereo mix I've ever heard. And I've heard it on vinyl. I've heard it on various CD masters. The only thing that maybe rivals it is the Mobile Fidelity SoundLab version, which is out of print. It's very hard to find. So I would definitely argue that the Atmos mix of Bridge of Sighs is the best in-print version of this title. And it cranks up great. It sounds so good when you turn it up loud. And I love details like, say, in the title track, Bridge of Sighs, where Robin piled a ton of overdubs. And it's almost like these guitars are shark-infested waters, and they're just kind of lurking behind your ears. And I love that. Like, it adds so much dimension to this recording, and makes it something that I like to play over and over again. Like, I have played this a lot this year. And it doesn't take away any of the glue, any of the power of the stereo mix. It just adds clarity, and it does a pretty decent job of putting you inside the mix. And that's something I think is very important. So up next at number 7 is The Last Will and Testament. This was a mix by Stefan Bowman, and is one of the number of mixes that he's done for the band. This is just the latest, and possibly the greatest too, because I know some people have been not so kind toward the Sorceress album, which I think is a good album. And I don't really own it, so I can't really comment on the mixing, but I think that the mixing on Last Will and Testament is exemplary. And it sounds very heavy. It's very driving, but it never feels compressed in any way. It feels very open. And it's another one of those mixes that the louder you crank it up, the better. And again, like sort of like the Bridge of Sighs and the Talking Heads mixes, it is front heavy. And I think that this helps it come across more with more power. than it would be, because again, this is a very guitar, bass, and drums dominated recording, but there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in this album. Vocal overdubs, guitar overdubs, keyboards flying around the room and doing different things. And I think that the Atmos mix really opens it up in a way that the stereo mix doesn't, because the stereo mix sounds infinitely more compressed to my ears. It sounds like it was mastered fairly heavy-handedly. I mean, it could have been worse, definitely, but in comparison to the Atmos mix, it's a much lighter touch to my ears, and it opens up just how mad and crazy this album really is, and it's fun. That's the thing about this album, all the back and forth over whether it's as good as the Opeth records from 10 years ago, back when he used to growl still, or if it's not. All that aside, I don't really care about all that. What I care about is how much fun it is, and you can hear Michael Ackerfeld having a lot of fun with using his voice and different overdubs and blending it together. And I think that Bowman's Atmos mix does a good job of revealing a lot of these things. And whenever I'm listening to this album, I'm having a good time. And if I were ranking purely on having a good time, this might be number one. It's just that as we get further up the list, oh boy, you're in for some treats. So that is a good segue to the next item on my list, which is Apostrophe, Frank Zappa, one of my very favorite records of all time. It's a total movie for your ears sort of situation. This was the fourth. This was the fourth in a series of Zappa Atmos mixes done by Karma Auger and Eric Goebel. And what the strength of this mix is that it turns your environment into a three-dimensional Frank Zappa album. And there's so much detail and nuance that is revealed in doing this, but it's never like, it never overtakes or feels like it's too much. You still retain the character and, I guess, glue of the original stereo mix, which is, I think, a fantastic sounding mix already. But in this case, I think what lets down the Apostrophe album a little bit, especially when compared to, like, say, Grand Wazoo and Waka Jawaka, is that I feel like the Atmos mix really... I feel like it reveals some of the limitations of the source material. And if you watched our series of videos on this that I did, and then I did with my friends Mike, Jocko, and Gavin, we talked about the different sources, how this album was kind of a patchwork. Side one was a mostly Bollock sound, and we determined that it was done over 2 sessions at least in the spring and then the winter of 73. Whereas side 2 is kind of a hodgepodge of different sources. And I would point to the title track, Apostrophe, as being one of those tracks that just doesn't really offer much, I feel, for spatial audio. Everything else sounds great, especially a song that I've overlooked for years, like Stinkfoot. The Atmos mix really improved my appreciation and appraisal of that particular song. But the Yellow Snow Suite, I think, in its entirety is brilliant. There's maybe one other criticism I would offer, and that's that I wish that they would have taken a little bit more chances in terms of like panning, because a lot of times it feels like everything is just very discreetly placed, but I don't really hear much movement. And I know that they're trying to honor the composer's intent, but I think that if Frank had access to Atmos technology, he would be irritating us with it. He would be pushing it to its limits. So I think that they could have stood to be a little bit more daring, like say with a song like Cosmic Debris, where you have a lot of sound effects. I'd like to have heard those sound effects travel, back to front, left to right, in the way that some of the Steven Wilson mixes that I'm going to talk about here soon do. And I kind of wish that Wilson had done this. I think that would have been an interesting choice, because obviously he loves Frank Zappa. I think he would have done a great job with it. And I think that he would have taken more chances in terms of moving things around. But that being said, this is one of my favorite multi-channel mixes of the year. And the fact that it ranks as low as it does, this is, what did I say, 6? It didn't even crack the top 5. Just shows you how great the next 5 really are. So we're moving on to number 5, and this might be a controversial choice for some, because when I did this review, it didn't seem like many people were that interested in it, and the comments seemed to indicate that a lot of people were disappointed in this album in general, and that's Storm Corrosion. This is the duo project with Michael Ackerfeld from Opeth and Steven Wilson of Porcupine Tree, and of course, who has made a number of great solo records too. Obviously, I like the material on some of these albums a lot better than Storm Corrosion. Like Animals, of course, is one of my favorite. If we're just talking about the material, that's one of my favorite albums of all time. Apostrophe 2, Ziggy Stardust. Like these are better albums. But I just think as an Atmos experience, Storm Corrosion is super underrated. I think as a musical experience, it's super underrated. And I felt like I needed to place it high on the list so that more people might check it out. I feel like this is one that may have let some of you by. I feel like this is one that some of you may have missed or maybe need to re-examine. I also like spatial audio mixes where the music has a lot of space and not like a bunch of things trying to compete for the same frequency or anything. And this is one of those examples where everything is very open, and because it's essentially like two people with some orchestration, and there's a little bit of drums from Gavin Harrison, but for the most part, you're just hearing two people, and I feel that really opens it up. And this is, again, one of those discs that when you put it on, it just sounds great right out of the box. You don't have to tweak anything in your system to make it sound wonderful. And I think that Wilson had a lot of fun with moving things around again. And that makes it one of those mixes that I think that if I were to demonstrate my system, I would grab for this one above maybe some of the earlier ones that I mentioned. Just throw on a track like Lock How, which is, again, it's cinema for your ears. Like I can sit back and listen to Lock How and I see images in my head. Like I play out a little movie in my head while I'm listening to it. So I think that this is a great album, and it needs to be more appreciated than it is. And it's one of the best mixes of the year, full stop. And it's an incredible improvement over the original 2012 version, which is included, so you can compare them. But Wilson lifted a lot of the individual instrument compression, and that makes it something that I think is, I think it's advantageous to this particular recording. It really does help it. So on to the next one, which is Fragile. And at this point, we basically have, I don't know, this is like a three-way tie here. From 4, 3, and 2, like I had such a hard time trying to decide which one was better. And here I have Fragile by Yes, which, I mean, this may be the best Atmos mix of the year. And the only reason why I ranked the next two above it is just because I like them better as albums. But this is a perfect translation of this album into an environment. And, just listen to a song like Long Distance Runaround Into the Fish. There's just so much stuff going on. And Wilson is able to find a place for all of it in the mix. And he's able to replicate a lot of the panning that happens when you listen to it in headphones and kind of close your eyes. It's sort of like taking that headphone mix and translating it to your room. And this is exactly what I want out of an Atmos mix or a 5.1 mix. And, this is one of the great Atmos mixes of all time. What can I say? There is just absolutely nothing I can criticize when it comes to Yes is Fragile. This is the second time that Wilson's taken a crack at mixing this. And I do think that every time Wilson revisits one of his mixes, he improves upon it. I can't necessarily comment on the original 5.1 mix. I think it is included on this, but I'm not sure. I never owned it. So I'm not sure if the 5.1 that's included is in fact a reduction of the Atmos mix or if it's the original 2015-ish. I guess I'd have to look into that. But I think this is another one of those demo discs. If somebody is over at your house and what is this Atmos thing? Convince me, win me over. I would say play Roundabout, play South Side of the Sky, play The Fish and Long Distance Runaround. These are all demo-worthy tracks. And not only is it demo-worthy for Atmos, I also feel like this is the best version of this album, period. And I've owned a couple of them over the years, including the 2003 remaster. I owned it on vinyl, like an original pressing. And I also owned the Mobile Fidelity Sound Labs version, which was flawed. And I think that this is far and away the best way to hear this album. This is an example of one of those albums that just has way too much going on for two speakers. And having 5, 7, 9, however many you have, is going to open this album up immensely. And I even feel like if you're not that much of a Yes fan, this mix will make you a Yes fan. It has certainly helped me to appreciate this band. And they were never really one of my favorites back when I was first getting into prog rock. But now they are. And this is one of my favorite albums of theirs. So, like I said, the top 5 are real close. And my number 1, I purely went for personal taste. But we are climbing up the list to number 3. And at number 3, I have Skylarking by XTC. Now, I did review this, and it didn't do as well as some of my other reviews, which is a shame because I objectively think that this is one of the best spatial audio multi-channel mixes I've heard in my entire life. Any year, this is one of the very best. It absolutely opens this album up. And it's one of those, again, sort of like Fragile, that is too much to be contained in stereo. And by having 5, 7, 9 speakers, how many you have, it opens you up to the world of this album and just how rich it is. I would point to a specific song, like The Man Who Sailed Around His Soul. And that is just, it's a 3-dimensional album. It places you right inside this recording, and it's very creative. It takes risks in terms of the panning, moving stuff around the room and making you feel like you are part of this album. And it's just ultimate escapism. And isn't that really what we're looking for? It's just ultimate escapism. And it's a wonderful record. And that, honestly, this one and Fragile are so close to me. Like, in terms of like what I would point to as the greatest Atmos mix of all time. I know that that's saying a lot. And I try to avoid hyperbole on this channel, but I think that those two and like Lark's Tongues and Aspic, the King Crimson album, are strong contenders for why I really believe in Atmos and why I love it. They are really strong examples of that. And this recording's flawless. And it's an incredible improvement over the original 5.1. I mean, it's just not even close. So if you don't have this one, even if you're not that much of an XTC fan, I implore you to give it a shot, because it's one of the great albums. And yes, I prefer it to Fragile. Yes, I prefer it to Fragile. That's a sentence that doesn't make any sense, but, there's not much else to say, other than, check it out for yourself. And, I think you'll be pleased. So moving on to number 2, again, this is totally subjective. And the only reason why this album beats out the 2 before it is just because I love it more, and that's Red by King Crimson. This is an album that Steven Wilson once said didn't need a remix, at least not a stereo remix, because he said that all you need to do with Red is just to pot up the tracks, turn up the monitors, and it sings. And that theory is perfectly communicated in this new Atmos mix because it brings the power, man. And it isn't gimmicky. Like, you might criticize Fragile for being a little gimmicky, which again, it's yes, like that's their whole thing is like, overdoing it a little bit. But with Red, I feel like you need to be more conservative in your mixing choices. And so that when there are opportunities to do things spatially, they really stand out. And I'm talking about like the bridge section in the title track, where it sounds like the guitars are traveling from the back of your room and up your wall and into space. And I just love that. It adds such a dimension to this album that was lacking before. But I wanted to point to the live recording Providence, which is the best sounding track on the album, although Stardust also sounds wonderful. But this really does place you on stage with King Crimson in 1974. And, the choice of moving things around within the stereo space again is very reserved. Like, it never feels gimmicky to me. It adds to the musicality quotient, which is, I think, the best thing you can say about a mix is that it makes things more musical, that it communicates something musically. And I think that's super important. And this is, hands down for me, this is the Atmos mix of the year. And, that should be a little bit of a spoiler. My number one is not an Atmos mix. And it's the whole reason why I titled this video Multi-Channel Mix and not Atmos Mixes, because there is one non-Atmos mix. And if you know me, you probably saw this coming. And that is Jethro Tull's Bursting Out. This is, of course, a 5.1 mix of a live album. And this is famously something that Steven Wilson said that he didn't want to do. He never wanted to do live records. He wanted to do studio albums only. But his work on Bursting Out is absolutely brilliant. Is it, is it the most exciting or demo-worthy disc on this list? Probably not. And the reason for that is that it's primarily an 8-track recording, so he didn't really have that much to work with. But I think that limitation adds to it. The fact that he was able to make something so beautiful within those limitations makes it even better. And if we just want to throw objectivity out the door completely, I just like it more. It's an album that makes me happy every time I hear it, even more so than the Talking Heads. This is an antidepressant for me. I think that he did such a brilliant job of, because like a lot of live mixes want to put you in the audience, but this particular one, Steven has placed us inside the album. So we are both inside the band on stage, and, we can kind of hear the guitars up front and the keyboards drifting toward the back. So it kind of feels like you're sitting center stage, like maybe Ian Anderson's perspective, but it also places you within the audience perspective. Like you feel like you're within the audience. This shouldn't really work. Like it's not logical or realistic in any way, but in terms of like listening to an album, I think it works very well. And I wish that more live mixes took this approach. Now, there are obviously overdubs, and that is something that, may cause some controversy among some people. I personally think overdubs and live albums are just fine. And it's something that actually improves my enjoyment, because we do have some of this material on the Heavy Horses box set, Live and Burn, Switzerland, 1978. But I prefer it this way. I prefer it with the overdubs. I prefer the tracks that are mixed in from an 8-track source. And yeah, we are dealing with an album that bounces between an 8-track source and a 24-track source. But Wilson has made them indistinguishable, which is seriously impressive mixing. Even though it's not an Atmos mix, it's 5.1. I think it's the best mix of the year. You'll have to let me know what you think in the comments below. If you've had a chance to hear some of these, all of these, half of these, let me know what your list is. Let me know if there's anything I left out. Maybe you thought Aphrodite's Child 666 was really sweet, although I don't think that's the case. But I also wanted to let you know that I am working on a couple of other videos coming very soon. One of which is I'm going to do the Jethro Tull live mixes ranking, but I thought it would also be fun to do kind of a sequel to this video if it does well. And I would like to talk about my favorite multi-channel discoveries over the past year, because this past year has opened my eyes and my ears to these new formats. Before this, I was a doubter like many of you in the comments section are. But now I believe in this technology and I love it. So I think it would be fun to talk about mixes that are maybe 20 years old or even older, and how much I appreciate them. So that will depend on how well this video does. And that includes liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and commenting below. So let me know if this is something that you would like me to do. Otherwise, if this video doesn't do extremely well, my next project is going to be the Jethro Tull live mixes, which I have been working on. All right. Thanks for stopping by. It's been fun, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.